I was walking my golden retriever Benny through our quiet neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, when Sharon Davies threw a fistful of rock salt directly at my dog's face. The morning had started peacefully enough. I'd woken up early, made my coffee, and decided to take Benny out before the desert heat became unbearable. It was February, so the temperatures were actually pleasant in the low 70s, perfect weather for a long walk. Benny had been cooped up the previous day because I'd been working overtime at the engineering firm downtown, so he deserved a good outing. We were about 3 blocks from my house when I saw Sharon standing on her perfectly manicured lawn, wearing her signature white polo shirt with the Pine Ridge HOA logo embroidered on it. She was holding a blue bag of rock salt, the kind people up north use on their driveways during winter. In Arizona, in February, when there hadn't been snow in Scottsdale in decades, I tried to walk past quickly, keeping Benny on the opposite side of me, away from her property. Sharon and I had history. Ever since I'd moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago, she'd made it her personal mission to make my life miserable. My grass was too long by half an inch. My car was parked 3 inches over the property line. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 47 minutes past the allowed time. She documented everything with time-stamped photos and formal complaints filed with the HOA board, which she happened to chair. But this morning, she wasn't interested in my garbage cans. Her eyes were locked on Benny. "Your dog needs to be on the other side of the sidewalk," she called out. I stopped walking and turned to face her. "He is on the sidewalk. We're not on your property." The HOA bylaws state that all pets must walk on the left side of the sidewalk when passing homes. "Your dog is on the right side." I'd read those bylaws front to back when I bought my house. There was no such rule. "Sharon, that's not in the bylaws. It was amended at the last board meeting, Section 7, subsection 4, paragraph B. I attended that meeting. There was no such amendment." Her face reddened. She was a tall woman in her early 50s with short blonde hair that looked like she'd asked her stylist for the "Let me speak to your manager" special. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she took 3 steps toward the sidewalk. "Don't you dare correct me about HOA rules." "I am the HOA board president." Benny, oblivious to the tension, wagged his tail and tried to move toward Sharon. He was the friendliest dog on the planet, always assuming everyone wanted to pet him. I pulled him back gently. "We're just passing through, Sharon. Have a good morning." That's when she reached into the bag and threw the salt. The white crystals sailed through the air and hit Benny square in the face. He yelped and immediately started pawing at his eyes, shaking his head violently. More salt had landed on his nose and in his mouth. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted, dropping to my knees beside Benny. His eyes were watering profusely, and he was whimpering in a way I'd never heard before. My hands shook as I tried to wipe the salt away from his face, but I knew I was potentially making it worse by rubbing. "That will teach you to follow the rules," Sharon said, her voice cold and matter-of-fact. "If you'd had your dog on the correct side of the sidewalk, this wouldn't have happened." I looked up at her, barely containing my rage. "You just assaulted my dog. That's animal cruelty." I was spreading salt on my driveway. "It's not my fault your animal got in the way. Your driveway is 20 feet away and you threw it directly at him. Prove it." She crossed her arms, a satisfied expression on her face. I fumbled for my phone, but I knew I hadn't been recording. The damage was already done. Benny was still pawing at his face, and I could see his eyes were red and irritated. Some of the salt had gotten into his mouth, and he was drooling excessively, trying to spit it out. "I'm taking him to the vet," I said, scooping up all 65 pounds of golden retriever into my arms. "And then I'm calling the police." Sharon actually laughed. "Go ahead. I'm on the Scottsdale Citizens Advisory Board. I've worked with the police department for 15 years. Good luck with that. I didn't respond. I was too focused on getting Benny to my car and then to the emergency vet clinic. He was whimpering against my chest, and I could feel my shirt getting wet from his excessive drooling. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The nearest emergency vet was Desert Hills Animal Hospital, about 15 minutes away in normal traffic. I made it in 9, running 2 red lights and praying no cops would pull me over. If they did, at least I'd have someone official to report what Sharon had done. I burst through the doors of the clinic with Benny still in my arms. The receptionist, a young woman with purple hair, took one look at us and immediately hit a button on her desk. "Emergency, exam room 3, she called out. A vet tech appeared within seconds, a man in his 30s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately made me feel slightly less panicked. "What happened?" he asked, leading me quickly down a hallway. My neighbor threw rock salt at his face. It got in his eyes and mouth. This was maybe 12 minutes ago. We entered the exam room and he helped me set Benny on the metal table. Another tech appeared, this one a woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Let's flush his eyes immediately," the male tech said. His name tag read Marcus. "Can you hold him steady?" For the next several minutes, I held Benny as gently as I could while they flushed his eyes with what Marcus explained was a sterile saline solution. Benny struggled at first, but eventually seemed to realize they were helping him. His whimpers decreased, though his tail stayed tucked between his legs, a sure sign he was scared and in pain. "His eyes are very irritated," Marcus said after the flushing was complete. "We need to get Dr. Paterson in here right away." The female tech disappeared and returned less than a minute later with a woman in her mid-40s wearing a white coat. Dr. Stephanie Paterson introduced herself while simultaneously examining Benny's eyes with a small light. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said, her voice professional but warm. I explained the entire encounter with Sharon, not leaving out any details. Dr. Paterson's expression grew increasingly serious as I spoke. "Did anyone else witness this?" she asked. "No, it was just the 2 of us on the street." She nodded, continuing her examination. She looked in Benny's mouth, checked his gums, and ran her hands over his body, checking for any other injuries I might have missed. "The good news is that the eye damage appears to be superficial," she said finally. "The flushing you guys did immediately was exactly right. We'll need to do a fluorescein stain test to check for corneal abrasions, but from what I can see, I think he's going to be okay." The relief that washed over me was so intense I had to sit down on the small stool in the corner of the room. "The bad news," Dr. Paterson continued, "is that this was absolutely a case of animal cruelty. Rock salt is corrosive and can cause serious chemical burns. If it had been in his eyes much longer, or if the concentration had been higher, he could have suffered permanent damage or even blindness." "What do I do?" I asked. "I'm calling animal control," she said firmly. "This needs to be reported and documented. What your neighbor did was a crime." She left the room and Marcus stayed with me and Benny, continuing to monitor his condition. The female tech, whose name tag said Jennifer, brought Benny a small bowl of water. "He can have a little, but not too much right away," she explained. "We need to make sure there's no damage to his esophagus from the salt." Benny lapped at the water gratefully. His eyes still looked red and irritated, but he was no longer pawing at them. I stroked his head gently, fighting back tears. He was my best friend, my constant companion, especially since my divorce 3 years ago. The thought that Sharon could have permanently harmed him made me feel sick. Dr. Paterson returned about 10 minutes later with a clipboard and a serious expression. Animal control is on their way, she said. I spoke with Officer Lisa Montgomery. She's one of the best, and she takes animal cruelty cases very seriously. She'll want to take your statement, and I'll be providing her with my medical findings and photographs of Benny's injuries. Photographs? Yes. We document all suspected abuse cases thoroughly. It's crucial for any potential legal proceedings. I hadn't even thought that far ahead yet. Legal proceedings. Against Sharon Davies, HOA president and apparent pillar of the Scottsdale community. Jennifer took the photographs while Marcus continued monitoring Benny's vital signs. They were incredibly professional and thorough, photographing his eyes from multiple angles, his mouth, and even his paws where he'd rubbed at his face. Dr. Paterson performed the fluorescein stain test, which involved putting orange drops in Benny's eyes and then examining them under a blue light. I held my breath during the entire process. Minor abrasions on both corneas, she announced. Nothing that won't heal, but definitely evidence of injury. This absolutely corroborates your account of what happened. Officer Montgomery arrived about 20 minutes after that initial call. She was a stocky woman in her 40s with short, dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately appreciated. She had a digital recorder and a tablet for taking notes. Xavier Paterson, she asked as she entered the exam room. I'd given them my name when I arrived, but in the chaos, I'd barely registered anything except getting help for Benny. Yes, that's me. Please call me Xander. Okay, Xander. I'm Officer Montgomery with Scottsdale Animal Control. Dr. Paterson filled me in on the basics, but I need to get your full statement. Can you walk me through everything that happened this morning, starting from when you left your house? I took a deep breath and recounted the entire incident again, this time even more detailed. Officer Montgomery stopped me frequently to ask specific questions. What time did I leave my house? What was the exact address where the incident occurred? Had Sharon threatened me or Benny before? Did I have any previous documentation of problems with this neighbor? That last question opened up a whole new avenue of conversation. I pulled up my email on my phone and showed Officer Montgomery the dozens of HOA violation notices Sharon had sent me over the past 2 years. Overgrown grass. Incorrect outdoor light fixtures. Car parked at the wrong angle, on and on. This woman has been harassing you, Officer Montgomery said, scrolling through the emails. I thought it was just typical HOA stuff, I admitted. Annoying but not illegal. But this morning she crossed a line. She absolutely did. Officer Montgomery handed my phone back. What she did constitutes animal cruelty under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 13-2910. It's a Class 1 misdemeanor, possibly a Class 6 felony depending on the extent of the injuries and intent. What happens now? I'm going to go speak with Miss Davies. I'll get her statement and inform her that a formal complaint has been filed. Based on Dr. Paterson's medical findings and your testimony, I'll be issuing her a citation at minimum. Depending on her response and cooperation, this could escalate to criminal charges. My stomach churned. Part of me wanted Sharon to face serious consequences for what she'd done. Another part of me was terrified of the retaliation. She was the HOA president. She had connections in the community. What would she do to make my life hell after this? As if reading my mind, Officer Montgomery said, I know this is scary, especially given her position in your HOA. But you need to understand that what she did was assault with a dangerous instrument against an animal. We take these cases seriously. And if she retaliates against you in any way, that's another crime we can charge her with. She took a few more notes, then had me sign a formal statement. Dr. Paterson provided her with copies of all the medical records, photographs, and her professional assessment of Benny's injuries. "We're going to keep Benny here for a few more hours for observation," Dr. Paterson said after Officer Montgomery left. "I want to make sure his eyes continue to improve and that there's no delayed reaction to the salt ingestion. You're welcome to stay with him, or you can go home and come back later." I decided to stay. There was no way I was leaving Benny alone after what he'd been through. Marcus brought me a cup of coffee and a comfortable chair. They moved us to a different room, a quieter recovery area where Benny could rest on a soft bed instead of the cold exam table. I sat there for the next 3 hours, watching Benny sleep, occasionally stroking his soft fur and checking my phone obsessively. Part of me expected Sharon to start blowing up my phone with angry messages, but there was nothing. The silence was almost worse than a confrontation would have been. Around 1 in the afternoon, Officer Montgomery called me. "Mr. Paterson, I wanted to update you on the situation. I visited Miss Davies at her home approximately 2 hours ago. And she denied throwing salt at your dog. She claimed she was spreading salt on her driveway and that your dog charged at her, causing her to spill some in his direction defensively." My blood boiled. That's a complete lie. Benny didn't charge at her. He was beside me on the sidewalk, and she threw the salt directly at his face. I believe you, Mr. Paterson, and here's why her story doesn't hold up. First, she has no snow or ice on her driveway because this is Arizona in February. When I asked her why she was spreading rock salt, she claimed it was for weed control. I contacted a landscaping expert, and while salt can be used to kill weeds, rock salt is not appropriate for that purpose and would damage her own lawn. Second, if your dog had charged at her as she claimed, she would have salt on her clothing and person from the defensive spill. She was completely clean. Third, her body language and demeanor when I questioned her were consistent with someone being deceptive. So what does this mean? I issued her a citation for animal cruelty. She has 30 days to respond, either by paying the fine or requesting a hearing. I've also documented that she made false statements to a law enforcement officer during an investigation, which could lead to additional charges. Will there be a restraining order or anything to keep her away from me and Benny? I'm recommending that you file for a protective order through the court system. Animal control can't issue those, but given her position as your HOA president and the pattern of harassment you've shown me, I think a judge would take your petition seriously. I'll provide you with the incident report number and a copy of my findings to support your application. After I hung up with Officer Montgomery, I felt a strange mixture of validation and anxiety. The system was working, justice was being pursued, but I knew this was far from over. Dr. Paterson came in around 2:30 to check on Benny. His eyes looked much better, no longer as red and swollen. He was awake and more alert, even wagging his tail weakly when he saw her. "He's doing great," she said, giving him a thorough examination. "The corneal abrasions are minor and should heal completely within a week. I'm sending you home with antibiotic eye drops to prevent infection and some pain medication. Keep him calm for the next few days, no rough play or swimming, and I want to see him again in 1 week for a follow-up." She handed me detailed care instructions and the medications. "I've also prepared a complete medical report that you can use if you decide to pursue civil action against your neighbor. Between the medical expenses here today and any emotional distress, you'd have grounds for a lawsuit. I hadn't even considered suing Sharon." The citation and potential criminal charges seemed like enough. But as I looked at the bill, which came to just over $800 for the emergency visit, medications, and follow-up appointment, I realized that Sharon needed to be held financially accountable too. "Thank you," I said to Dr. Paterson, for everything. You guys were amazing today. That's our job, and please know that we're here if you need anything else. Cases like this make me so angry. Animals are helpless, and people who hurt them need to face consequences. I carefully loaded Benny into my car, making sure he was comfortable on the back seat with his favorite blanket. He was still a bit drowsy from the mild sedative they'd given him during the examination, but his tail thumped against the seat when I petted him. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept checking the rearview mirror to look at Benny, making sure he was okay. My mind was racing with everything that had happened, everything I needed to do next. File for a protective order. Document everything. Maybe talk to a lawyer about a civil suit. And somehow, I still had to live in a neighborhood where Sharon Davies was the HOA president. As I pulled onto my street, I saw Sharon's car in her driveway. My heart rate spiked. I quickly pulled into my own garage and closed the door behind me before getting Benny out of the car. I didn't want another confrontation, especially not today. I got Benny settled on his dog bed in the living room with fresh water and his favorite toys nearby. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and started making a list of everything I needed to do. Contact a lawyer, file for a protective order, document the incident in writing while it was fresh, take photos of Benny's injuries, send a certified letter to the HOA board about Sharon's actions. That last item made me pause. The HOA board consisted of 5 members, Sharon as president, 2 vice presidents, a secretary, and a treasurer. I'd met them all at various neighborhood events. They seemed like reasonable people, though clearly they'd been willing to go along with Sharon's petty enforcement of nonsensical rules. But surely attempted animal cruelty was different than complaining about grass height. Surely they wouldn't support what she'd done. Or would they? I decided to draft an email to the other 4 board members, CCing Sharon so she couldn't claim I was going behind her back. I kept it factual and unemotional, outlining what had happened, noting that animal control had been called and a citation issued, and requesting an emergency board meeting to discuss Sharon's conduct and fitness to serve as president. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit send. The response was faster than I expected. Within 15 minutes, I got a reply from Gerald Hoffman, one of the vice presidents. He was a retired accountant in his late 60s who lived 2 streets over. Xander, I'm shocked and appalled to hear about this incident. I'll be reaching out to the other board members immediately to schedule an emergency meeting. We take any allegations of misconduct by board members very seriously. Please provide any documentation you have, including the animal control report number. Best regards, Gerald. Then came a response from Margaret Chen, the secretary. She was a teacher in her 40s with 3 kids and 2 rescue dogs. Xander, this is absolutely unacceptable. As a dog owner myself, I'm horrified. Please let me know if you need anything. I'll be at the emergency meeting and will be calling for Sharon's immediate resignation. Give Benny a gentle pet from me. Margaret. The treasurer, Robert Kim, sent a brief message stating he was available for an emergency meeting and wanted to hear all the facts before making any judgments. The other vice president, Patricia Thornton, didn't respond. That worried me. Patricia was Sharon's closest friend on the board, and they'd been known to vote as a bloc on various issues. Sharon herself didn't respond to my email, which didn't surprise me. She was probably consulting with a lawyer, figuring out how to spin this situation to her advantage. I spent the rest of the afternoon taking care of Benny, administering his eye drops and trying to relax. But my phone kept buzzing with messages. First from neighbors who'd somehow already heard about the incident, expressing shock and support. Then from Margaret Chen, saying the emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for the following evening at the community center. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound made me think Sharon was outside doing something to my property in retaliation. I got up 3 times to check my security cameras, which I'd installed months ago after Sharon's harassment had escalated. Nothing appeared on the footage, but I couldn't shake the anxiety. Benny seemed much better by morning. His eyes were still a bit red, but the swelling had gone down significantly, and he was eating normally. I worked from home that day, not wanting to leave him alone. I was an engineer for a renewable energy company, and fortunately, most of my work could be done remotely. Around 10 in the morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Xavier Paterson?" "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Detective Maria Sanchez with the Scottsdale Police Department. Officer Montgomery from Animal Control forwarded your case to me. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" My heart jumped. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "I wanted to let you know that we're opening a criminal investigation into the incident with your dog." When I reviewed Officer Montgomery's report and the medical documentation from the veterinary clinic, I felt this warranted a more serious response than just an animal control citation. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that Sharon Davies could potentially face criminal charges. Arizona law treats intentional harm to animals seriously, especially when there's clear evidence of malicious intent. Based on your statement and the physical evidence, we believe we have grounds for charges." Detective Sanchez asked me to come down to the police station to give a formal statement. She wanted me to bring any additional evidence I had: the emails from Sharon, security camera footage if any existed, any witnesses who could speak to the pattern of harassment. I went through my files and found 2 years' worth of documentation. Every nitpicking HOA violation notice, every threatening email about fines, every passive-aggressive note left on my door. I even had a few recordings from HOA meetings where Sharon had singled me out for minor infractions while ignoring similar or worse violations by other homeowners. That afternoon, I drove to the Scottsdale Police Department with a thick folder of documents and a USB drive full of digital evidence. Detective Sanchez was a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-30s with her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. She spent over an hour going through everything I'd brought. "This is textbook harassment," she said, shaking her head. "And the incident with your dog appears to be an escalation. In my experience, when this type of behavior isn't checked, it gets worse. I'm glad you're taking this seriously." She had me write out a detailed statement, then sign it. She explained that the district attorney's office would review the case and decide whether to file charges. It could take a few weeks, possibly longer. "What should I do in the meantime?" I asked. "Document everything. Don't engage with Miss Davies if you can avoid it. If she contacts you, don't respond directly. Keep all messages and forward them to me. And definitely proceed with that protective order. Even if we charge her, having that court order in place gives us more tools if she continues the harassment." I left the police station feeling simultaneously empowered and exhausted. This was consuming my life. All I'd wanted was to live peacefully in my home and walk my dog without drama. The emergency HOA board meeting was held the next evening at 7 at the Pine Ridge Community Center. I arrived 15 minutes early with a printed copy of everything I'd compiled for the police. Benny was home resting, and I'd asked my friend Tyler to stay with him, partly for Benny's comfort and partly because I didn't trust Sharon not to do something while I was out. Gerald Hoffman was already there, setting up chairs and a table at the front of the room. He greeted me warmly and introduced me to his wife, who'd come along for moral support. I want you to know that I've been president of 2 different HOA boards over the years, Gerald said. I've never seen behavior like Sharon's. This is beyond the pale. Margaret Chen arrived next, followed by Robert Kim. They both expressed concern about Benny and asked how he was recovering. Their genuine care made me feel less alone in this fight. Patricia Thornton arrived exactly at 7, barely acknowledging anyone. She sat down at the table with her arms crossed, her expression hostile. Sharon arrived 3 minutes late, which surprised me because she was usually fanatically punctual. She was dressed in a business suit, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup impeccable. She looked like she was ready for battle. She didn't look at me once. Gerald called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on short notice. We're here tonight to address a serious incident involving our board president, Sharon Davies, and a homeowner, Xavier Paterson. Xander has made allegations of animal cruelty and harassment. Sharon has the right to respond to these allegations. This meeting is being recorded per our HOA bylaws. Xander, would you like to present your case first? I stood up and walked to the front of the room. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice was steady as I recounted what had happened. I showed them the photos from the vet, the medical report, the animal control citation. I explained about the police investigation that was now underway. Then, I showed them the pattern of harassment. 2 years of documentation. The emails, the violation notices, the targeting. I'd created a spreadsheet comparing how many violations Sharon had cited me for compared to other homeowners. The disparity was striking. I'd received 47 violations in 2 years. The next highest homeowner had received 8. This isn't about enforcing rules fairly, I said. This is about Sharon using her position as HOA president to target someone she doesn't like. And when her petty harassment didn't drive me out of the neighborhood, she escalated to attacking my dog. Sharon's face had grown redder and redder as I spoke. When I finished, she stood up abruptly. "This is a witch hunt," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Xander has been a problem homeowner since day one. He doesn't follow the rules. He doesn't maintain his property to community standards. He thinks he's above the HOA covenants that everyone else follows." "Sharon, you threw salt in his dog's face," Margaret said quietly. "That is not what happened. His dog was off leash and charging at me. I defended myself." "Benny was on a leash," I said, "and I have no reason to lie. You're the one who lied to the animal control officer." "How dare you call me a liar?" Gerald banged his gavel. "Sharon, sit down. Everyone needs to remain calm. I will not sit down and be attacked in this manner. I have served this community faithfully for 6 years. I have increased our property values through strict enforcement of our covenants. I have organized neighborhood events and improved our common areas. And this is how you repay me. By believing the word of a man who can't even keep his grass trimmed." The meeting devolved from there. Patricia Thornton defended Sharon vehemently, claiming I was trying to destroy a good woman's reputation because I didn't want to follow basic community rules. Robert Kim asked careful, neutral questions, clearly trying to understand both sides. Gerald and Margaret were firmly on my side, pointing out that the medical evidence and police involvement spoke for themselves. After 2 hours of heated debate, Gerald called for a vote on whether Sharon should be suspended from her duties as HOA president pending the outcome of the police investigation. Margaret voted yes immediately. Gerald voted yes. Robert Kim, after a long pause, voted yes as well. Patricia voted no. That left Sharon, who technically could vote on matters affecting herself according to our somewhat outdated bylaws. "I vote no," Sharon said coldly. And I want it noted for the record that this board is making a grave mistake by persecuting me based on false allegations. 4-2, Gerald announced. Sharon, you are hereby suspended from your duties as HOA president effective immediately. You are not to attend any board meetings or communicate with homeowners in your official capacity until this matter is resolved. Do you understand? You'll regret this, Sharon said, looking directly at me. All of you. She gathered her things and stormed out of the community center. Patricia followed her, shooting angry glares at the rest of us. After they left, the atmosphere in the room relaxed slightly. Gerald, Margaret, and Robert stayed to talk with me for another 30 minutes. They apologized for not seeing the pattern of harassment sooner. They promised to review all of Sharon's decisions over the past 2 years to see if other homeowners had been targeted unfairly. What happens now with the HOA? I asked. Gerald will serve as acting president, Margaret explained. We'll probably need to call a special election to fill the position permanently. And honestly, Xander, we're going to recommend changing some of our bylaws to prevent this kind of abuse of power in the future. I drove home that night feeling cautiously optimistic. The HOA board had done the right thing. The police were investigating. Benny was healing. Maybe things would actually work out. That optimism lasted about 12 hours. The next morning, I woke up to find my car had been keyed. Someone had scraped a long, deep scratch down the entire driver's side, gouging through the paint to the metal underneath. My security cameras should have caught it, but when I checked the footage, I discovered that someone had spray painted the lenses black around 2 in the morning. I called Detective Sanchez immediately. She came out to take a report, along with a uniformed officer who took photos and measurements of the damage. You think it was Sharon? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I can't make accusations without evidence, Detective Sanchez said, but the timing is certainly suspicious. We'll see if any of your neighbors' security cameras caught anything, and this actually helps our case. It shows a pattern of escalating behavior and possible retaliation. She was right, but it didn't make me feel any safer. If Sharon was willing to vandalize my car, what else might she do? I spent $1,000 getting my car repaired, and another $500 upgrading my security system with cameras that were harder to disable. I also filed for the protective order, which required me to take a day off work to go to the courthouse and fill out extensive paperwork. The hearing for the protective order was scheduled 2 weeks out. In the meantime, I tried to maintain some semblance of normal life. I walked Benny, but only during daylight hours and in different parts of the neighborhood, avoiding Sharon Street entirely. I worked. I talked to my lawyer about a potential civil suit, and I waited. 3 weeks after the incident with Benny, I got a call from Detective Sanchez. The district attorney has decided to file charges, she said. Sharon Davies is being charged with 1 count of animal cruelty, a Class 1 misdemeanor, and 1 count of making false statements to law enforcement. If she's convicted on both counts, she could face up to 6 months in jail and significant fines. What about the vandalism to my car? We haven't been able to prove that was her. No footage from any nearby cameras showed anyone approaching your property. However, we're keeping the case open. A few days later, Sharon was formally arrested and then released on her own recognizance pending trial. The arrest made the local news. HOA president charged with animal cruelty was the headline on the Scottsdale Independent's website. The story included details about the incident and mentioned the ongoing police investigation. My phone exploded with messages from neighbors. Most were supportive, expressing shock that Sharon had done something so cruel. A few were hostile, accusing me of ruining Sharon's life over an accident. One email from an address I didn't recognize simply said, "You're going to regret this." I forwarded that email to Detective Sanchez, who said they'd look into it, but that anonymous threats were hard to prosecute without additional evidence of danger. The protective order hearing finally arrived. I showed up at the courthouse with my folder of documentation, my lawyer, and a serious case of nerves. Sharon was there with her own attorney, an expensive-looking man in a three-piece suit. The hearing lasted about an hour. I presented my evidence: the attack on Benny, the 2 years of harassment, the vandalism to my car, the threatening email. Sharon's lawyer argued that I was exaggerating normal HOA enforcement and that the incident with Benny was an unfortunate accident being blown out of proportion. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Winters, listened to everything carefully. Then she asked Sharon directly, "Miss Davies, did you throw rock salt at Mr. Paterson's dog?" Sharon hesitated. "It was an accident. I was spreading salt and the dog startled me." "In February, in Arizona, you were spreading rock salt for what purpose? Weed control. And you maintain that Mr. Paterson's dog startled you, causing you to accidentally throw salt in the animal's face." "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Winters looked at the medical photos, the vet's report, and Officer Montgomery's statement. Then she looked at the pattern of HOA violations I documented. "I'm granting the protective order," she announced. "Miss Davies, you are to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Paterson, his residence, and his vehicle at all times. You are not to contact him directly or indirectly. You are not to engage in any HOA business involving his property. This order is effective for 1 year, at which point Mr. Paterson can petition for an extension if needed." "Do you understand, Your Honor? I'm the HOA president," Sharon protested. "How am I supposed to do my job?" "You're currently suspended from that position, according to the documentation provided. And frankly, Miss Davies, your pattern of behavior toward Mr. Paterson suggests that you've been abusing that position. Consider this a clear message that such behavior will not be tolerated. Next case." It was a victory, but it felt hollow. Sharon shot me a look of pure hatred as she left the courtroom. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, clearly warning her not to say anything, but the damage was done. I knew this wasn't over. The next 2 months passed in relative peace. Sharon kept her distance, presumably on advice of her lawyer given the protective order and the pending criminal charges. Gerald did an excellent job as acting HOA president, taking a much more reasonable approach to rule enforcement. Several neighbors came forward with their own stories of Sharon's harassment, and the board began the process of reviewing and reforming our HOA bylaws. Benny made a full recovery. His follow-up appointment with Dr. Paterson showed no lasting damage to his eyes or overall health. He was back to his usual cheerful, bouncy self, though I noticed he was more cautious around strangers now, especially women with blonde hair. The criminal trial was set for late April. My lawyer advised me that there was a good chance Sharon would take a plea deal rather than risk a trial. The evidence against her was strong, and the district attorney was apparently not inclined to offer a sweetheart deal given her position in the community and her lack of remorse. He was right. 3 days before the trial was set to begin, Sharon's lawyer contacted the DA with a plea offer. Sharon would plead guilty to animal cruelty, and the false statement charge would be dropped. She'd pay a fine of $2,000, serve 100 hours of community service, and be placed on probation for 2 years. Part of her probation terms would include an animal cruelty counseling program and a prohibition on holding any HOA board position. The DA called me to get my input on the plea deal. "What do you think, Mr. Paterson?" I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted Sharon to face the maximum consequences, to go to trial and potentially jail time. But another part of me just wanted this nightmare to be over. Will she have a criminal record? I asked. Yes. The misdemeanor conviction will be on her record permanently. And she definitely can't be on the HOA board anymore. That's part of the probation terms. If she violates that, she goes to jail. Then I'm okay with the plea deal. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following week. I attended, sitting in the back of the courtroom with Benny's vet, Dr. Paterson, who'd taken a personal interest in seeing justice served. Tyler came too, for moral support. Sharon stood before the judge, her lawyer beside her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The past few months had clearly taken a toll. Her hair was less perfectly styled. Her clothes were still professional but not as crisp. The judge asked if she understood the plea agreement and its terms. Yes, Your Honor, Sharon said quietly. And do you wish to plead guilty to one count of animal cruelty? There was a long pause. Sharon's lawyer leaned over and whispered something to her. Yes, Your Honor, I plead guilty. Do you have anything you'd like to say before I accept this plea? Sharon turned and looked directly at me for the first time. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. But instead, she said, I let my emotions get the better of me. It was a mistake, not an apology, not an acknowledgement of the harm she'd caused, just a vague admission that she'd made a mistake. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced Sharon according to the agreement. $2,000 fine. 100 hours of community service. 2 years probation. Mandatory counseling. No HOA board positions. As we left the courtroom, I felt a strange sense of anticlimax. It was over. Sharon had been held accountable. But there was no dramatic moment of realization, no tearful apology, no sense that she'd actually learned anything. Outside the courthouse, Dr. Paterson put a hand on my shoulder. Justice doesn't always feel satisfying, she said, as if reading my thoughts. But what matters is that she can't hurt another animal without facing serious consequences. And she can't abuse her power over you and your neighbors anymore. She was right. This was as good an outcome as I could have hoped for. 2 weeks later, the Pine Ridge HOA held a special election for a new board president. Gerald was elected unanimously, and he immediately began implementing reforms. The bylaws were amended to include term limits, clearer procedures for violations, and an appeals process for homeowners who felt they were being treated unfairly. Margaret Chen drafted a new animal welfare policy that specifically prohibited any harm or harassment of pets. I also moved forward with a civil lawsuit against Sharon for the veterinary bills, the damage to my car, and emotional distress. My lawyer was confident we'd either win at trial or, more likely, Sharon would settle to avoid more legal costs and public attention. We filed the lawsuit in early May. Sharon's lawyer contacted mine within a week, proposing a settlement of $15,000. My actual damages were maybe $10,000 when you added up the vet bills, car repairs, security system upgrades, and legal fees. But my lawyer had asked for $30,000, knowing we'd negotiate down. Take the 15, my lawyer advised. It's a fair number and it means you're done with this woman forever. No trial, no more court appearances, no more stress. I took the settlement. Sharon paid in full within 30 days, and we signed a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I couldn't talk publicly about her, and she couldn't talk publicly about me. It was fine. I had no desire to relive this experience, and I certainly didn't want to spend more time thinking about Sharon Davies than I already had. By summer, life had returned to something resembling normal. I walked Benny every morning and evening without incident. I maintained my property to reasonable standards, without obsessing over every blade of grass. I went to the occasional HOA meeting and found them to be productive and drama-free under Gerald's leadership. Sharon's house went up for sale in July. According to neighborhood gossip, she was moving to Sedona to live closer to her sister. I felt a guilty sense of relief knowing she'd be gone. The protective order was still in effect, so we'd never crossed paths, but just knowing she was several streets away had been a low-level source of anxiety. The house sold quickly, and a nice family with 2 kids and a chocolate lab moved in. Their dog and Benny became fast friends, and I found myself actually enjoying living in Pine Ridge again. One evening in late August, almost 6 months after the original incident, I was sitting on my back patio with a beer, watching Benny chase a tennis ball around the yard. My phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello. Is this Xavier Paterson?" "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Linda Davies, Sharon's sister. Please don't hang up." I almost did hang up, but something in her voice made me stay on the line. "I know you have no reason to talk to me," Linda continued. "But I wanted to call and apologize on behalf of my family. What Sharon did to your dog was inexcusable. I've been trying to get her help for years. She has some serious issues with control and anger that she's never properly addressed." "Why are you calling me?" "Because she won't apologize herself. She's still convinced she was in the right, that you were the problem. And I couldn't let that stand. Someone needed to acknowledge the harm she caused. So I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for what she put you and your dog through." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much the apology meant, even coming from Sharon's sister instead of Sharon herself. "Is she getting help now?" "She's in therapy as part of her probation. I don't know if it's helping. She's my sister and I love her, but she's not an easy person. She never has been." We talked for a few more minutes. Linda explained that Sharon had always struggled with control issues, that she'd burned bridges in previous neighborhoods and previous HOA positions. The pattern had repeated itself over and over. "I hope moving here will give her a fresh start," Linda said. "Away from positions of power over other people, just living her life quietly." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The anger, the fear, the stress of months of legal battles. The relief of knowing it was over. The lingering anxiety about whether Sharon might someday violate her probation or the protective order. But mostly, I thought about Benny, who was completely unbothered by any of it now. He didn't hold grudges. He'd been hurt, he'd healed, and now he was back to living his best dog life, chasing tennis balls and making friends with the neighbor dog. There was probably a lesson in that somewhere. I finished my beer and called Benny over. He bounded up to me, tail wagging, and rested his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears and looked into his big brown eyes, which showed no trace of the injury Sharon had inflicted. "Good boy," I said softly. "Good boy." Life moved on. The following month, I met a woman named Wendy Thompson at a neighborhood barbecue that Gerald organized. She just moved to Scottsdale for a job at a tech company, and we hit it off immediately. She had a rescue cat named Milo who, after a cautious introduction period, became friends with Benny in that careful way that cats and dogs sometimes do. Wendy and I started dating, and I told her the whole story about Sharon and the salt incident one evening over dinner. She listened with increasingly wide eyes. "That's insane," she said when I finished. "I mean, I've heard of HOA horror stories, but that's next level." "It was pretty awful at the time," I admitted, "but it's over now. Well, mostly over. The protective order is still in effect for another 6 months, but Sharon moved away anyway." "You ever worry she'll come back, retaliate somehow?" I had worried about that, especially in the beginning. But as time passed and Sharon remained in Sedona, focusing on her own life, the fear had faded. "Not really," I said. "I think she learned her lesson. And if she didn't, well, she knows that the legal system will come down on her hard if she violates probation." Wendy reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm glad you and Benny are okay. That could have been so much worse." She was right. If Sharon had thrown more salt, or if I'd been farther from the emergency vet, or if Dr. Paterson hadn't been so thorough in documenting everything, Benny could have been permanently injured. Sharon could have gotten away with it. The HOA board might have backed her up instead of suspending her. A lot of things could have gone differently. But they hadn't. Justice, imperfect as it was, had been served. By the time the protective order expired in February, exactly 1 year after the incident, Sharon was fully settled in Sedona. According to the last update I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine, she was working part-time at a gift shop and not involved in any HOA activities. Her probation would continue for another year, but as long as she stayed away from HOA boards and didn't hurt any more animals, she'd complete it without incident. I never saw or heard from Sharon Davies again. Gerald served 2 terms as HOA president, then voluntarily stepped down to let someone younger take over. The reforms he'd implemented stuck, though, and Pine Ridge became known as one of the most reasonable HOAs in Scottsdale. We maintained our property values without the petty tyranny that had characterized Sharon's tenure. Benny lived to the ripe old age of 14, eventually passing peacefully in his sleep on a sunny afternoon in my backyard. I was devastated, but grateful for all the years we'd had together. Grateful that Sharon's cruelty hadn't robbed us of those years. After a few months of grieving, Wendy, who I'd married in a small ceremony in our backyard, convinced me to visit the local animal shelter. "Benny would want you to give another dog a good home," she said. She was right, of course. We adopted a 3-year-old mixed breed named Charlie, who'd been surrendered by his previous owners when they moved overseas. Charlie had boundless energy and a goofy personality that brought joy back into our lives. The story of Sharon and the salt incident became something I rarely thought about anymore. It was just a chapter in my life, a difficult period that I'd survived and moved past. When new neighbors moved in and asked about the HOA, I'd tell them it was one of the good ones, well-run and reasonable. If they asked follow-up questions, I might mention that it hadn't always been that way, that there had been some problems years ago that were resolved. But I didn't dwell on it. Life was too short, and I had too many better things to focus on. My career, my wife, my dog, my home. The things Sharon had tried to take from me but ultimately couldn't. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd wonder if Sharon ever thought about that morning. If she ever felt genuine remorse for what she'd done. If she'd actually changed, or if she was just better at hiding her controlling tendencies. If therapy had helped, or if she was the same person in a different location. I'd never know the answers to those questions, and that was okay. She was responsible for her own journey, her own growth or lack thereof. I was responsible for mine. What I did know was that standing up to Sharon, as frightening as it had been at the time, was one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Not just for me, but for all the other homeowners who'd been suffering under her petty tyranny. For the animals in the neighborhood who were safer without her, in a position of power. For the community as a whole, which had been forced to examine its bylaws and governance structure and make meaningful changes. Sometimes doing the right thing, the hard thing, creates ripples that extend far beyond what you can see in the moment. That morning, walking Benny, I'd just been focused on getting him help and holding Sharon accountable. I hadn't thought about reforming the HOA or protecting other homeowners, or setting a precedent that animal cruelty wouldn't be tolerated. But all of those things had happened anyway, as natural consequences of seeking justice. On the 5-year anniversary of the incident, I took Charlie for a walk past Sharon's old house. A family still lived there, the same one who'd bought it from her. Their chocolate lab was older now, moving a bit slower but still friendly. Their kids were teenagers, probably getting ready for college. Life had moved on. The neighborhood had moved on, and so had I. As Charlie and I walked home in the warm Arizona sunshine, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the veterinary team who'd saved Benny's eyes, for Officer Montgomery and Detective Sanchez, who'd taken the case seriously, for Gerald, Margaret, and Robert, who'd done the right thing on the HOA board, for Judge Winters, who'd granted the protective order, for the district attorney who'd prosecuted Sharon, for my lawyer who'd helped me navigate the civil suit, for Linda Davies, who'd had the courage to apologize when her sister wouldn't. And most of all, gratitude for Benny, who'd been my companion through the hardest years of my life, and who'd survived Sharon's cruelty to live many more happy years. The story could have ended so many different ways. But this was the ending we got. Justice served, lessons learned, a community improved, and a man and his dog who got to live in peace. Sometimes, that's the best happy ending you can hope for. And sometimes it's more than enough.